You're off.
All right. Good evening, everybody. How are ya? Thanks for having me here. My name is Stephanie Sy, and I live about 30 minutes from here in Shenango on a farm. I brought Tyler here. He is my protege. He's like a son to me. He also, I'm blessed enough to call him an employee of mine. So I'm going to tell, what?
Thank the Lord.
Oh, I'm going to tell you guys a story tonight. My life is kind of like 10 stories in one. So every time I go to speak, I always try to prepare and put it into words and into a timeline, and then I throw it away and I don't bring it. It's like this big. But something that I want to share with you is a scripture. And I'll get to this later in my testimony, but there was a time where I decided that I was going to take my own life. And I challenged God. And a lot of times when we challenge God, he doesn't like that. He doesn't show up unless it's with money, right? Because he says we can do it with that. But I played Russian roulette with the Bible, and I opened it up. And I did one of these, and I said, you better show me something. You better say something now. And I just happened to put my finger on 1 Timothy 1:16 that says, but for that very reason I was shown mercy, so that in me, the worst of sinners, Christ Jesus might display his immense patience as an example for those who believe in him and receive eternal life. And let me just tell you, God has a lot of patience. So we'll start at the beginning. When I was a little girl, my father was a pastor, but yeah, well, he also was in the occult. So he was dabbling in both worlds. And with that comes a lot of open doors. And it's not that he was a bad guy, but he came from a broken home. And that's something that my family struggles with. It's generational curse of brokenness. And so my parents were divorced, their parents were divorced, and even my great-grandparents were divorced before it was cool to be divorced. My grandmother, my father's mother, was married 9 times. And so, yeah, she's like Blanche Devereaux. But so growing up as a kid, something that I really struggled with when I was young was wanting to be seen. As a child, there were a lot of things spinning around me very quickly that I shouldn't have been privy to. But my parents were just doing what they saw. You know, we learn as children how to behave. And unfortunately, they didn't have role models, and neither did I. And so at a very young age, I started to act out, and I just wanted to be seen. I just wanted to get some kind of attention, whether it was good or bad. And so at age 14, my parents decided to split up and got a divorce. And within 3 weeks, my father was dating another woman. And as a 14-year-old girl, this is kind of exciting, right? Because it's like this new young woman, mom sucks, you know, and this girl she's only 12 years older than me. She wanted to be my friend. And so she saw me, and I really liked that about her. But the problem is that there was just no respect there. My mother asked that she stay away from us until we were able to grieve the divorce. And my father said that that wasn't necessary. And so very quickly we became, my sister and I became pawns in this divorce. And you see that a lot, you know, kids becoming a piece of a game in a divorce. And it's awful. And as a child, you don't know how to process that, you know? So when dad's telling you bad things about mom and you're like, mom's awful, you know? And then you go see mom and she's telling you bad things about dad and you're like, yeah, he's awful. It's very confusing on a young mind. And so, you know, as a child before they got divorced, my upbringing was pretty much something like you would see on television when you watch the Lifetime movies, you know? They hit each other. The violence went both ways. Lots of cussing, lots of yelling, lots of hurtful words. There was a point that I remember around 9 years old that I was in the car and my dad was driving and my mother was in the passenger seat, and he asked her to pick a place to eat and she wouldn't. I don't recall why, but I remember that his response to that with me and my young sister in the back seat were, if you don't pick a freaking place to eat, I'm gonna wreck this car into a tree and kill us all. Well, to them, it was just mean words, but to us, it was terrifying. So bringing back to me being now age 14 and now they're split up, now Dad's got a new girlfriend, Mom moves to Kentucky, which is where we're from. Yeah, Louisville. And so in that split, my mother took my young sister with her and I stayed here because I was old enough to decide. And so again, at that age, I wasn't able to wrap my mind around how much it hurt to have my little sister, you know, in another state. But the worst part about it is that we were still pawns. And so my mother wouldn't tell my father where my sister was. So guess what? We can play that game too, right? So my dad shipped me off to West Virginia to stay with a friend of the family, and my mother didn't know where I was, and that went on for a couple of months. When we came back, I was, of course, happy to be home, and my friends were happy to see me. And at that age, parties were starting to become a thing. And so, you know, as a young girl, I was popular and pretty, and guys noticed me, and I liked that, and I just wanted somebody to love me, you know. So at parties, they were drinking and smoking marijuana, and I figured, well, I'll do that too, right? Because that'll keep me in the in crowd. And at age 15, I lost my virginity, and it was to a boy that thankfully I had dated for an entire year, so it wasn't like, you know, a one-night stand or anything, but I was still very young and I didn't understand what was happening. And to lose your virginity at that age opens up a door to a very dark world of principalities. And so as the years progressed, I became more popular because I was very boisterous and loud and bold, and I had no problem telling people about themselves, I'll tell you that. And I was also really good at keeping secrets about myself, so no one really had any clue what I was doing or who I really was. They saw this facade. And so, although I was sleeping around with several men, boys, no one knew that. So I never got the bad reputation, you know, and so I was able to skate through life pretty comfortably. So at age 15, I met some boys at a party, and I really liked them, and they were older than me. And they wanted to know if at my school, which was a different school than theirs, if cocaine was a thing. And so I was like, of course, in my head, I'm like, I don't know, is it? But of course I said, oh yeah, we've got the best cocaine there is. Yeah. So naturally they said, oh yeah, get us some. And I'm like, oh man, alrighty. So I start asking around, and sure enough, you know, Satan's not hard to find, and I found cocaine. And so I take it back to them, and I'm so proud of myself. But of course, in my mind, I'm not going to try it. I'm just going to give it to them and let them do whatever they're going to do with it. No. They said, let's do some. And so at that point, I had only ever smoked weed or drank alcohol. But I thought, all right, well, they're doing it, and they come from very wealthy families, and they're very well-known boys, and okay, sure, why not? So that started a life of cocaine use. At age 18, I got kicked out of high school because I was caught selling drugs on school property. I'm quite lucky that at this point my father's no longer in the occult. He's also no longer a pastor, but he is a state police officer. And so praise God for his mercy, because my dad was able to get me out of what should have been a felony and set up a program where I would go to rehab during the day and I would be tutored at nighttime. And then I would get to walk with my class if all went well. So I decided to do so, right? I was in big trouble and I knew it. So I did okay. I went to rehab and I met some kids who had a far worse upbringing than I did. And I kind of felt selfish, even though looking back now, I know I had it pretty bad too. But when you're comparing that to children that are molested by their parents and things like that, it's, you know, it's numbing. So I graduate high school by the skin on my teeth and things are going pretty good. And then I meet a guy at a party the summer that I graduated, and we started to date very seriously, very quickly. And he was about 5 years older than me, and he had his own apartment. And so guess what? I moved out because I'm an adult now and I can do what I want. Because, you know, it always makes sense when we make decisions at that age. But my parents were so fed up with me at that point that they really didn't care. They were like, go, get out. You know, we're so sick of dealing with you. I had beaten my stepmother to the point that I broke her glasses off of her face. She had to go into the hospital. And I mean, I was an angry child. So they were quite ready to get rid of me anyhow. But you know, parents are supposed to fight for their kids, and they didn't fight for me. I can't say that they didn't try to get me on the right path, but the fight wasn't there like it should be. They were still very selfish, and they let me go. So that was in July. And in October, I found out I was pregnant with my first child. But at this time, me and the guy were using drugs again and doing ecstasy and cocaine and partying probably 4 days a week. And so when I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. I called my dad and he cussed me out. I called my mom and she told me good luck and hung up on me. So now here I am, 19 years old. And I am struggling to figure out what I'm going to do here. But I knew that I wanted to keep the baby. We draw lines in the sand for ourselves that we'll never cross, right? And abortion was the line that I would never cross. I knew that. I knew it was wrong. Pastor, a cult, still had some seeds planted at some point, you know? And so I just was never going to do that. And so I quit everything. And I was going to be a good mom. And I was really excited because now there was going to be someone that would love me and love me unconditionally, and I could love them back. Well, the pregnancy was awful and the guy was violent. He didn't quit doing drugs. And when I was about 7 months pregnant, he went out one night to get a case of beer and he didn't come back. And when he came back in the wee hours of the morning, he thought that we would, you know, play nicey-nicey. And I wasn't gonna do that. He smelled like someone else, and I knew that he had been with another woman. And so when I turned him down sexually, he kicked me in the stomach when I was 7 months pregnant, and he choked me, and he hit me until I was unconscious, and I was in the hospital for 21 days. Wow. So I had my son. I did have him early from the stress of the pregnancy, but he was healthy. He was little. He was just 6 pounds and 19 ounces, but he was fine. Praise God. And so shortly thereafter, Dad and I split up. He actually went to jail. And let me just be clear as well, because sometimes when I tell this story and then I look back, I forget to mention that I was also violent in the relationship. I mean, that was crossing the line, but I also stabbed him, hit him with a candle, hit him with a metal machete. So I was no saint here. This was a very mutual, violent relationship. Yeah, I didn't play. No. And as little as I am, 5'2", I also was always very tiny until this third child came along, but that's later in the story. And I was a mighty little thing, you know. And so we split up, and I moved home for a little bit, and it was nice, and life was okay. And I moved out and got my own apartment, and I ran into a guy one night that I went to high school with, and he was a good guy. We were friends in high school, kinda. He was a little older than me, but he was just a really good guy. Didn't do drugs, drank a little bit, you know, but so we started dating, and he was good to me. He let me move in, and he helped me take care of my son, and he was just a great influence for me. But at one point he said, all right, well, you need to get a job. You know, I was getting child support and some help from my parents up until then. And so he was really good friends with the guy who owned a bar. It's not good. But he got me a job. and it went good for a while. And then here came back the sexuality and the, you know, being a woman and guys noticing me, and you know, I started to play with fire. And being in the bar life and then having a young child, you're tired. You know, you're tired without all that with a new child, but I was tired. And so I slowly started to do cocaine again. And as a young mother, you know, that sucks. You don't want to think about that, but that's what I did. And I remember one of the things that sticks with me is that when he was about 2 years old, we had a trip planned to go to the Cleveland Zoo. And I was so excited about it. We wanted to take him to this new place, and you know, but I went to a party that night. I was just gonna have one drink, and that was it. And at 8:30 in the morning, my boyfriend, who has my son, wants to know where I'm at. Well, I was still at a party and I hadn't slept all night, and I'd done cocaine all night and smoked cigarettes and just everything you could possibly think of. And he said to me, well, guess what? You're going to the zoo because you promised your son and you're going. I said, fine, let's go. Well, I remember I was so sick at the zoo that I could barely walk. And I really missed that I didn't get to enjoy that day, you know, but we all have things that we regret, and you have to learn to forgive yourself, right? So him and I, we date for quite some time, and we were really great friends. And that's really what it mounted up to be. It amounted to. He was an atheist, and and I was kind of a Christian. Like kinda, like I had God in there somewhere. He's like really buried, but I figured that doesn't matter, right? You can still be with someone that's a non-believer. What's it matter? That's not my problem, right? So we got married, and then it started to matter. And I'm still doing drugs, but the Lord's reaching for me. You know, He's touching me. He's got people coming and speaking to me, the harvesters. And he's starting to get in there a little bit. And I start arguing with my now husband, you should know who God is too. And I play that, you know, self-righteous biblical game. As for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. And he's like, whatever, psycho. You know, how are you going to say that and then you stay up all night doing cocaine? So I was super hypocritical. And he knew that I was partying. And he just kept his mouth shut. And he didn't want to lose me. And he was just so nice. Well, he was so nice that we had a party at our house one night, and we were drinking, and this young guy came. Now, when I say young, I'm 26, about 26 at this age, or at this time. He's 18. That's like gross, right? But I thought he was super cute, and he was really, really intrigued by me. I had some tattoos at that point and was kind of edgy, and he started to pursue me, even though I was married, and I pursued him right back. Well, my husband and I hadn't been together intimately in months, and guess what? I found out I was pregnant. And I approached my husband and told him the truth. And I told him that I was done, and we separated. And I started to date this guy. And so now I'm like, man, this guy really likes me. He was adopted. So if anybody knows what it feels like to need love, it's him. So this time it's going to work out, right? It's going to work because he needs love. I need love. We've got love here. He likes my son. It's just going to be perfect. Great. Well, at 18 years old, you came from no love. I came from no love. How are you going to love each other? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And he started to become very jealous of the need that my small child, my 6-year-old son, needed. And he started to even get a little violent with him and got violent with me. And I remember one night my son, Braden, who's now 20, come running down the stairs at 6 years old to help mommy because he heard me screaming. And he slammed me into the stove, and the stove broke, the door shattered, and my son jumped on him, little tough guy that he is, and he got slung across the room and smacked off the cabinets. And so Yeah, he slammed him off the cabinet. So that kind of continued for a little while. And then I moved out. I took it for so long. You know, it's super easy to look at someone who's going through an abusive relationship and say that they should leave. But until you're in that position, you really don't know what it's like to have to make that decision. It's really not that easy. But I did, and I moved in with a good friend of mine, and she was a caregiver, and she was wonderful to me. And she helped me take care of my now daughter that I have. But not before, during the pregnancy, Satan got a hold of me again and reminded me how I had now screwed up twice. And now I was the mother of 2 kids with 2 different dads, and how gross that is, and how shamed I should feel. And so I slipped my wrist when I was pregnant with my second child, and I ended up in the hospital. And my stepmother, who was the lady that my dad started dating that I put in the hospital years before, came to my rescue. She was a good woman. She is a good woman. And she works in the hospital, and she told them that she would sign for me to be responsible for me so that I didn't have to sit in a padded room for 3 days, and she took me home. But she forbid me to speak to Guy and told me that I was going to start taking care of myself and getting myself better. And so I did. And, you know, when I had my daughter, things were okay. You know, Guy came to the hospital to watch her be born. Her and I both nearly died giving birth. Her and I both had some heart issues while when I was in labor. I had an emergency C-section with her, and she was nearly 7 weeks early because of the stress of the pregnancy. So, you know, things repeat themselves. But he came, he saw her be born. I was touched, and then he left and disappeared for 3 days while I was in the hospital. Turns out he was with somebody else and getting tattoos, and he certainly wasn't ready to be a father. So I'm staying at home now, and my parents are helping me, and they're taking care of me. And time to get a job again. So I'll give you one guess as to where I went. You guessed it, the bar. But this time I was working at a bar that was a strip club. And let me tell you, whew, yes. And let me tell you how quickly that world gets dark. So I'm working in the strip club. Thank God I didn't get up on the stage. Got some limits that I can still proclaim. But I managed a strip club. The money was incredible. And I had a day job. During the day, I worked for a chemist, and I ran his lab. Because leadership was something that was always, just came natural to me, you know. And so I had this great job during the day, and I worked 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. And then I had to be at the strip club at 8 at night, and I sometimes wouldn't get home till 3 in the morning. Well, that doesn't leave very much time to be a mother. So my son, who now lives with his father, and my daughter, who's God knows where, I left her with so many people that she shouldn't have been with for days at a time. And I'm just living my best life. You know, working, making money. I feel good. I've got this great townhouse because I'm making, you know, a few $1,000s a week. That's a lot for a single mom, and I'm pretty proud of that, you know. However, it wasn't enough because it never is. You know, we are insatiable creatures. And so I had a guy come in one night, and he asked me about one of the girls. And he said, "Do you think she would go home with me?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. I can ask." He said, "Well, if you do, I'll give you $1,000. Excuse me? So wait, you don't want me to go home with you. You want her, but you're going to pay me? Sure thing. So I walk over to her and I ask her, and she was like, "Oh gosh, no." And I said, "Girl, he's a nice guy. He's here all the time. He's wealthy. He owns a huge furniture store, and he's clean, and you know, he's not like a rapist. Girl, he's going to pay you $5,000 to go home with him tonight. What's the big deal?" Well, kind of planted a seed. And as the night went on, I fed her alcohol and I fed her drugs, and she went home with him, and I made $1,000. You know, most of us do real good at just taking ourselves down. It's sin. You know, we just like to mess up our own lives, but not me. I was going to take down people with me one after another. And so I got girls doing drugs that would have never, well, I can't say they would never have done drugs, but they weren't doing drugs at that time. And I started to run a very successful prostitution ring with about 20 girls under my belt, and I was quite the madam. I was also dealing drugs. Yeah. And I was making a lot of money. And my parents were so proud of me because they thought it was from all the raises I was getting at the chemist lab. Yeah, right. I was just super good at shipping and labeling. But so that world, you know, it was really dark. And yeah. And so at this time I'm single and I'm living life, you know, and we hire this guy and he's good looking. You know, he's real big, look like he could bench press a Buick. And I'm like, yeah, buddy, what's your name? And we'll call him Ron. That's not his name. But Ron likes me too. So we start dating, and it turns out that he comes from a great family. His father was the principal of a school. His parents were still married. All of his aunts and uncles are still married. I mean, talk about picture perfect, you know? And so we start dating, and his parents are appalled. They're like, excuse me? You're dating a girl that runs a strip club that's covered in tattoos and doesn't go to church? I don't think so. Well, I'm really good at bedazzling. And so I met them and I talked them off the ledge. Meanwhile, I really wanted to just kill them, but I romanticized them into liking me. And him and I dated for several years. Well, I'm the kind of person that if you hurt me, it's really hard for me to let it go. I'm vengeful and I don't forget. And I'm really creative with my mouth and with the abilities I have when I'm angry. And I don't say that to brag. I say that because it's scary looking back now. But it turns out that one of the girls that was working at the strip club, this guy and her were friends, and they started talking back and forth, and he almost cheated on me, but he didn't. He caught himself and he came clean, and I said, fine. Fine. And I was gonna forgive him, right? But I didn't. And at this point, it was now my desire to torture him without him knowing it, because that's how I operated. So at this point, daddy number 2 comes into the strip club one night. And I'm like, how you doing? And we become friends, and he starts seeing his daughter, and he knows all the things to do as well. He's very, very toxic, like I was. And so we started seeing each other while I'm still seeing Ron. Okay? I go even further to make Ron and John friends. They work out together, they hang out. John comes over and watches movies with me and Ron, and it's quite the Jerry Springer show. But they trusted me, you know? And so I stopped sleeping with my boyfriend because I was sleeping with my ex. Guess what happened? I am fertile, let me tell you. Pregnancy number 3. Don't stand too close to me. But I'm now pregnant again. And my parents are a bit privy to the fact that me and my boyfriend, the actual one that I want people to know about, aren't sleeping together and we're having problems. So I know that if they find out, because they've also seen John a lot, they're not stupid people. They were jerks, but they weren't stupid. And they were gonna figure it out. And so I was terrified. My parents finally were looking at me with pride. I was making good money. They had no idea how, but they thought I was doing really well, and they were really proud of me, which gave me attention from them, because that's all I ever really wanted. And so I couldn't tell them. And I couldn't tell Michael. I'm sorry, Ron. Whatever. Schmeichel, Ron, whatever. But I was going to call an abortion clinic and just see what they said. I just wanted to see what they said. Now I have to tell you that as wicked as I was for so many years, I actually used to protest against abortion in Washington, D.C. And so I knew what these clinics looked like. There were hundreds of people with signs and they were screaming at the girls coming in, and we would show you these little babies and how big they are, and we would urge you and beg you not to do it. So I thought, well, okay, I'm just gonna call and I'm gonna see what they say, and that's all I'll do. Well, I knew that I was very early on. I always find out I'm pregnant at like day 28. My body's, I'm in keen view with my body. But I called the clinic and they said to me, and the reason I said I was never in my mind going to go ahead with an abortion was because I couldn't stomach the thought of having to have that DNC where they come in and basically rip the baby out of you. And so it wasn't because of the baby so much, but it was because of me, because I thought it would hurt. So when I called the clinic, they told me, well, how far do you think you are? I said, a few weeks, maybe 4. She said, well, good news. If you're less than 6 weeks, you can just take a pill and that'll just end the pregnancy. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. So I said, okay, great. That sounds great. So then in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, I'll just show up there. But when I get there, there's going to be a lot of people there that are going to tell me that I'm a sinner and don't do it and you're a murderer. And of course, I won't be able to walk in at that point. So I drive to the abortion clinic in Pittsburgh. And guess what? I can't find it because it doesn't even look like an abortion clinic. It's a building with no one outside. And when I got there, I walked in and it was quiet. And there was a security guard there, and I said, is this Planned Parenthood? Which, what does that even mean, Planned Parenthood? I'm here to abort my child. What are we planning here? A murder. It's not Planned Parenthood. It's Planned Murderhood is what it is. But I go in, and I'm there, and I'm filling out the paperwork with my liaison or whatever she is, and I'm shaking, and she can see it. She said, are you okay? I said, well, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. So I'm like really nervous. And she said, oh, well, we have a Christian staff person, therapist here. You can talk to her. So I go in and talk to the Christian therapist who says to me, good news. Good news. They have so much good news at a place like that. She said, it's not a baby yet. Did you know that? And I said, no, it's not. She goes, oh my gosh, no, it's not a baby. It's just a clump of cells, okay? So right now it doesn't have arms, legs, it doesn't have a heartbeat. So this isn't really like what you're thinking. And I'm like, well, okay, all right. That sounds okay. So they give me a pill and then they tell me that once I take the pill, that it will stop the pregnancy, that's how it works, that it will stop progesterone from going into my womb and the baby will no longer grow. And then the next day, I will take 4 other pills that will then take the baby and shed it from my lining like you would a monthly period. Sounded easy enough. I was still a little nervous, but a Christian counselor told me that it wasn't a baby, so we're good. So I took the pill. And I went home and I took the second pills. And for 2 days, I laid on my bathroom floor in what felt like death as I miscarried this child. It was not romantic. It was not innocent. And it wasn't painless like they made it sound like it was going to be. It was like labor. And I was all alone because I couldn't tell anyone. So at this point, I start to slip into depression. And I've decided at this point, I'm going to stop doing drugs. I'm going to stop doing everything. I'm going to get my life together because, man, now I've crossed every line you can possibly cross. There's nothing left. So now I'm going to have to get it together. So I quit the strip club and I started working at an insurance agency and as a secretary and start dating a new guy. And he's a great guy. And I still keep touch with the ex-husband atheist, but just a friendly, nothing shady. But he was always a friend that I could reach out to and talk to and tell some things to. And I did. I shared with him what happened. And he was very disappointed in me, but he was there for me. So my now boyfriend and I are dating, and we're living in Cranberry. And I'm working in insurance, and things are going okay. And I remember driving in Cranberry traffic, and we all have ever been to Cranberry, you know what that's like. It's bumper to bumper all the time. And I just so happened to land behind the bumper of a Christian with a sticker on their car that had the scripture that says, "I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb." And at that point, it all come flooding back to me. It felt like a fever that had come over me. And at this point, I knew in that moment that I had really murdered my child. I had never thought of it again, really. I was depressed over it, but I really hadn't thought of it again until that day. And then at that point, man, it was a lot. And I was starting to think, man, maybe my life would just be better if I wasn't in it. Maybe my kids would be better off. They're both screwed up because of the lack of upbringing that they've had. I've repeated history, and so now they have anger issues, and they are attention needing, and I don't know how to deal with that. I don't even know how to deal with it for myself. I'm attention needing. Get away from me. Go do something. You know, that's the mom that I was. Can't you go play? Because I didn't know how to be a mother, you know? And so I decided that I was going to kill myself. And a friend of mine said to me, my ex-husband, by the way, who's the atheist, said to me, "Well, what about your church? Why don't you try and go there? I thought that you said that that's like the all healing place. Go to your church." And I was like, I mean, it's not a bad idea. So I did. And I went to Victory Church in Cranberry, big old church with a big old bold pastor who just talks about all the things that some churches won't. And that day, I'll give you one guess as to what he was talking about. Abortion. The moment that he said abortion, I thought I was gonna vomit. And I felt like the spotlight came down on me, and everyone in that 5,000 or more populated church, where they knew he was talking about me, you know, and I was gonna sneak out of there. But I didn't. I couldn't move. And then he said something to me, well, to everyone, but to me, that changed everything. Because let me tell you why I was gonna kill myself. Because the devil had started to whisper lies into my ears about what was going to happen the day that I went to heaven and saw that baby. Okay? And I had been dating this new guy. He wasn't new anymore. We'd been together a couple years. And we had had 2 miscarriages in that time frame. And I really wanted those babies. And he was a really good guy. And so when those miscarriages happened, I started mourning those babies. And by the way, today, October 15th, is Loss of Babies Day, like recognition. So we would light a candle and put it outside. And then the devil started to say, well, what do you think that other baby's gonna say when you go up to heaven? You murdered me, but you cried for my brother and sister? And those things started to just come over me all the time. And that's all I could hear, and that's all I could picture is, what was I going to say? So sometimes as Christians, we say things that aren't true. And we tell people things that are garbage. And someone told me once that if you kill yourself, you'll go to hell. And so I believed that. So I thought, well, I'd rather die and go to hell than to face that baby. And that's what I was gonna do. So at church that day, Pastor John Nuzzo said, that's a lie. That when you go to heaven, there's nothing in heaven but love. God is love. And there is no reason for that baby to have any memory of what happened here, because it doesn't matter. Here doesn't matter. This is just a blink. We're a blip, you know? And when he said that, he said, and one day when you do go to heaven, mommies in here, because 1 in 3 of you have had an abortion, when you get there, that baby's not going to say, why did you kill me, mommy? He'd say, I love you, mommy. And I'm so happy to see you. My brother and sister are here too. And it saved my life. My husband and I are now married. And we started praying for a baby. And we were doing all the right things, but we couldn't have one, you know. We got told by a doctor that we couldn't have one, but we were living life right now. We were both going to church. No more drugs, no more alcohol. He wasn't really into that so much anyhow. And we were just doing good things. I saw changes in my children, my 2 older ones. My son's now 20, my daughter's 13. And I watched God start to change me, and it started to overflow onto them. I watched the anger go away and the fits that they would have go away. And guess what? I watched my mother, who was an alcoholic a lot of my life, get healed because of what God did to us, or for us. And I watched my father, who was a backslidden, occult-loving pastor, start to turn around.
Praise the Lord.
I watched racism leave my family. I watched bitterness leave my family. I watched pride leave my family, and it was awesome. And we just decided that we didn't need a baby. We were doing okay. And then one day we were at church, and one of the lay pastors at that church come down after praise and worship, and they said, you know, when you greet and you're saying hello to everybody and everything, and they said, hey, I need you and your husband down at the front of this church. I got to pray for you two. The Holy Spirit has been overflowing, and oh, I've got something to tell you. So we were like, okay, sure, whatever. So we go down to the front of the church and we get prayed over. And he starts speaking in tongues and he starts crying. And he can barely contain himself. And then he opens his eyes and he says, oh, you and your husband are going to do ministry. And you're going to host an event, and it's going to become the biggest thing that this city has ever seen. And he was like, but, oh, all you got to do is say yes. Just say yes. And if you say yes today, God's going to answer the desire of your heart. And I was like, okay, yes, whatever, sure. So I go home, 1 Timothy 1:16, and I say to God, yes, sure, fine. Well, that was Sunday. I had no idea what the desire of my heart was at this point. And on Tuesday morning, I found out I was pregnant with our now soon-to-be 4-year-old daughter. I felt like I was getting the flu. And I had had a pregnancy test in the closet for a couple years. And I thought, I'll take it. It's going to go in the trash anyhow. And sure enough, it came up positive. And the pregnancy was perfect. And I gained a lot of weight. And she was really healthy. And she's a fireball. She knows who she is. She's brave. She's loud. And I know that big personality's got big purpose, you know? But it gets better. My husband and I started pressing into the Lord because we were just lukewarm Christians. And we started joining small groups. And we started looking into things and building a relationship with him. And then in January of this year, I went to a retreat. And at the retreat, it was something like a horror film, but let me explain why. The group of girls that I was with were praying for Exhibit A. And then 3 of them looked at me, you know, like in a horror movie where all the things. And I was like, what? And they were like, yeah. I said, yeah, what? And they were like, God said it's time. I'm like, God said it's time for what? Because again, listen, I've got ADHD. I don't remember what they're talking about. Time for what? They said, you know. And I sat down on the edge of the couch and I said, you know what? And I thought about it for a minute and the Holy Spirit just kissed the back of my neck. You know, I know it sounds weird, but that's what it felt like. This sweet voice that said, the event. You're a pastor. I I said, oh, I'm not a pastor. No, thank you. But I said it out loud because it actually took me by surprise. And when I said pastor, the girl grabbed my face and kissed me right on the mouth and was like, yep. And I was like, no. Do you have any idea what I've done in my life? No. But then I learned there's different kinds of pastors. There's pastors that stand up here on a Sunday and they minister to us and they feed us great food in the soul, for our spirit. And then there's pastors like me who are going to go out and get back every single one of those people I took to hell with me. And so my husband and I started a ministry called Unbranded, which is called the Ministry for Misfits. And we hosted an event in September called Jesus Woodstock. And we hosted, and now God's the only one that can call it a revival, but let me just tell you, it was revival style. And we're going to start doing it. Thank you. We're going to start doing it every single year. This year was our first year. And I knew what God said to me that day. I felt that Holy Spirit touch. And I took a loan out for $20,000. And the event cost $18,000 some dollars. And we got about 8,000 of it back. And I've had a couple people say to me, what about the other 10, man? God didn't deliver. I was like, not worried about that, right? And let me tell you why. Because my ex-husband, the atheist, got saved at my house in a small group with me and my husband, my now husband, praying over him back in the summer. Thank you. And at Jesus Woodstock, I shared with the ladies a little bit earlier, one of the most precious gifts that's worth $10,001. It's priceless. I stood up on the stage and I shared my testimony like I have had the privilege to do with you tonight. And as I was getting ready to walk off the stage, the pastor that was with me said, do you want to say anything else? And I said, no, I'm good. And then I was like, yes. It was like the Holy Spirit whipped me around. And I said, there's someone here that I've been praying for months, and you know it. I said, I've come up to this mountain. I've sacrificed time with my children, with my career. I said, I've put it all on the line for you, and you know it. And God's tugging at your heart right now. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, who are you? Shut up. What are you talking about? But it just kept coming out. And I waited, and no one came up. And I'm like, duh, you sound dumb. So I went to walk off the stage, and the pastor spun me around and was like, there she is. She said, it's me. And I came down off the stage, and I'm excited, but my endorphins are, the adrenaline's running. And I prayed for her, but I never asked her what we were praying for. She didn't tell. So I went home. I was exhausted. Jesus Woodstock wore me out, but it was awesome. But the next day I got an email from a lady, and it said, Stephanie, the next time you pray for a complete stranger in the wind, just know prayers are answered. She said, when my unsaved construction worker gave me a flyer for an event hosted by a woman that I had never met, had been praying for me for months. She said, I woke up on July 27th after years of alcoholism, and I had zero taste for alcohol, and I've never drank a drop since. I never went through withdrawal. I don't know how that happened, or I didn't know how that happened until tonight when you touched me. She said, the Holy Spirit said to me, there's your girl. She's the one that's been praying for you. Her prayers are the ones that God heard. And she wanted me to know that. And I don't take any credit for that. All I did was say some words. God healed her. But what confirmation that just one life was changed because of what obedience looks like. And my mom and my father sat there at that event together like a family. And I watched healing happen for them too. And that's what God can do. Amen. There is no place too dark that God can't come and get them. And we know that walking into this ministry, it's gonna be tough. But we are going for the people that hate God. We're not going for lukewarm Christians. We're going to get back all of them, because if I can come back from that, so can they. Thank you.